Morning. Can everyone hear me? David, I didn't get a chance to ask you beforehand. Would you mind leading us in a word of prayer like normal?
Our Father, we thank you for this very beautiful morning, and especially now that we're studying from your word. We pray to be with Darrell as he directs our class, and help us remember what he's prepared, help us clear and sure. Pray, Father, also for the ones that are on the out this morning, or ill, or ill. Help us be with them and strong in the back of this will. We pray now that you'll be with us in our study. In Jesus' name.
Thank you, David. Anyone that's visiting, David's kind of our, I don't know how we'd start a Sunday morning Bible class without his prayer, so that's kind of, he's kind of our designated hitter on Sunday mornings. So, this morning's lesson is titled Serving by Encouragement. So today marks the midway point in our Sunday morning adult summer series, and it could be because of us trying to raise a couple kids now, or just part of me getting older. More than likely it's a combination of both, but this year's summer series has just flown by for me, and I assume it's been that way for most everyone else. The title of this morning's lesson, like I mentioned, is Serving by Encouragement, and I can't think of a more appropriate topic this morning. And I'll give you a couple reasons why I feel that way about this morning's lesson. So the first reason, in a little over an hour, we're going to have the pleasure of receiving a sermon from a young man who graduated high school only a few weeks ago. And anyone who isn't aware, Carter Brown is going to be preaching at the 10 o'clock hour this morning. And I'm really looking forward to that. What an encouragement this is to us as a congregation in a time where there seems to be more and more gray hair as we look around, and that's the hairs that are willing to hang on still. And I can say that now. Okay, I'm part of that number, so I can officially say that. I shaved this morning so that my beard didn't appear quite as gray as it tends to after a couple days worth of growth. But honestly, churches of Christ as a whole are losing popularity, and I think we all recognize that. I can see that here, at our congregation. I can remember whenever I first started passing communion in the back, and Randy Feisley would come and ask how many you counted. We would, each person on the edge and someone in the middle would count each section, and if you didn't have over 100, I think he would count it again himself because he didn't believe you. Because it was 120, 125, 130 per section, which real quick math adds up to 350 to 400 people. And we see that's not the case nowadays, and that can be a little discouraging. But we also realize that everyone we talk to has the same issue, I guess you would say, the same problem, the same lack of attendance and lack of importance for attendance among members. So as the sad reality of this unfolds around us, we should all be encouraged this morning when Carter steps behind the pulpit. And I think it's important that we realize, as I mentioned, that no one's twisting Carter's arm to be up there. Carter approached the elders with a desire to serve, asking if and when they'd be willing to let him speak on a Sunday morning. And once again, what an encouragement that is to us. Carter's not the only young person in this congregation with the desire to serve, and I'm encouraged every time that Owen, Nathan, Jacob, and so many others get up and speak publicly with a willingness to desire and to step up out of their comfort zone, or at least my comfort zone, as you can tell as I stammer across my words this morning. If it's not out of their comfort zone, it's out of mine. To get up here and talk and try to serve as members. So we're going to feel that sense, or at least I hope we do, feel that sense of encouragement this morning from Carter. But let's also remember to encourage him after he's finished. I've mentioned before that a while back, Harry had sent me a text message after a Sunday evening sermon that I had done. And it was a huge encouragement to me. You know, I can remember coming home and, you know, we went and ate supper, whatever, come home. I had laid my phone down. I go over, I pick it up, and I'm like, oh, I wonder who this is. And I didn't have his number saved at the time, so I had to look it up. And it meant a lot to me. And there's been other people, and I won't mention any names, but there's been other people that's done the same thing that you don't expect it, and it catches you off guard, and it can mean more than what anyone realizes. So, but as I told you, and I know I mentioned this in the last Sunday evening sermon I did, but you know, his reply is what left me speechless. You know, I was already, you know, impressed by the fact and encouraged by the fact that he had sent it. When I reply back and say, thanks, you don't know how much that means, he puts back, it goes both ways. And, you know, when I see people like Bill and Harry and Lloyd, Michael, and so many others who seem to effortlessly get up here and preach and teach, it never really dawned on me that they need that encouragement too, that means something to them as well, because, you know, they're so polished in what they do that it's, you know, it feels like, well, I don't need to encourage them because they're already, they know that they're doing a good job. But that, you know, of course isn't the case. It means something to them as well. The second reason this lesson seems appropriate this morning, as we reach the midway point, or as I called it, the center of our summer series, I think this morning's lesson, the topic applies to the 6 lessons in front of it and the 6 lessons behind it. And I had thought about going through each one and trying to come up with a way to tie in the encouragement topic into all the other lessons, but I'm not going to, because I felt like it would take too much time. But just as we think of the lessons that we've heard, you know, serving as one body, you know, how that encouragement to one another helps each other to be that part of the body that we need them to be throughout this congregation. You know, as you wake up in the morning and your head may tell you that you're ready to go, but then when you hit the floor, your feet tell you otherwise. You know, we just have to think that sometimes we have to use our head to encourage our feet that, yeah, I really can do this. I can get up, and after a few steps, you know, things, and maybe a few cracks, things start feeling better, and you start moving better. And I think as that one body, you know, encouraging each other is really important. And there's so many other topics, you know, serving under elders and under deacons, and just everything that we've talked about up until this point, serving like Christ. You know, that we can see how encouragement plays such a big role in being able to step out in this world that unfortunately is trending in what I would say the wrong direction, stepping out and serving Christ. Throughout the rest of our time here this morning, we're going to explore the topic of serving by encouragement, and hopefully be reminded of the importance of being an encourager. Hey, Harry, you're here. I didn't. I do a bad job at looking around because I get nervous when people staring at me. So, I appreciated that when I looked at Harry. He was looking down. So, okay. In order to understand how to serve by encouragement, I think it's important to touch on the exact opposite, which would be serving by discouragement. The first example that comes to mind when thinking of a discourager would be a non-believer. Whether these are friends, co-workers, family members, non-believers can act as a stumbling block towards believers. So I'd like to turn to Matthew 18 and read the first 7 verses. Matthew 18, verses 1 through 7. At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling to him a child, he put them in the midst of them and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and be drowned into the depth of the sea. Woe to the world for temptations to sin, for it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the one by whom the temptation comes." So we read here that Jesus explains that whoever causes one of his children, one who believes in him, to sin, it'd be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. And I think it's a pretty clear picture that Jesus is painting here. Pretty clear and dark picture for those who act as a stumbling block for God's children. It was interesting for me to find out that this was a common punishment for someone who did something really bad during this time, to have that big millstone tied around their neck and for them to be cast in the sea to drown. And I can't really think of a worse death, to be honest. I guess I can. I guess it would be the cross, but that's certainly not the way that anyone would desire to go. However, Satan's continually at work using his angels to tempt Christians to turn from God. And of course, we can't isolate ourselves and avoid contact with non-believers, nor does God want us to. We read of Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners in Matthew 9, verses 9 through 13. And I'm not going to turn there because I think I'm running behind already. But we read of Jesus eating with the tax collectors and sinners here and learn that he does so because those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. God expects us to live in the world, but not be of the world. We're to be teachers to those of the world and provide a good example for them to live by, all without being negatively influenced by them, which admittedly can be difficult to do. It can be hard for us to spend time with non-believers. Maybe it's at work. Maybe they use language that we shouldn't use. Maybe they go places that we shouldn't go. Whatever the case may be, it's hard for us to spend 40 hours a week with someone that we work so closely to and them not rub off on us a little bit. But it's our goal for them to not rub off on us, but for us to rub off on them. And I think that's why it's so important for us to come here every time that we can, spend time with other people, other members outside of these settings so that we can encourage one another, because it does take that encouragement not to get beat down by the majority of people who don't have the same beliefs or same feelings that we do. Another example of a discourager that comes to mind are gossipers. So I looked it up in the dictionary. Actually used my phone, but it was Merriam-Webster's website. So it defined a gossiper as a person who habitually reveals personal or sensational facts about others. Gossip can either be true or false. Okay, we know that. But the one thing about gossip that always remains true is it's almost always meant to tear down the person who the gossip is about. Let's turn to Proverbs 11, 12 through 13. Proverbs 11, 12 through 13. Whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding remains silent. Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a thing covered. So here we've got some insight on gossipers, and we notice how the writer mentions in verse 12 that whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense. A man of understanding remains silent. And I guess that kind of reminded me of the old saying that if you don't have anything nice to say, to not say anything at all. I'm sure we can all think of people, whether it's family members, friends, co-workers, or unfortunately could even be our own brothers and sisters in Christ who may seem to live by, live to gossip. That's something that they really enjoy. And I know I'm guilty of it from time to time. And I imagine if we're all being honest that there isn't anyone in here that can say that he or she hasn't gossiped at one point or another in their life. Much like most of our news networks today, people seem to be naturally drawn to sharing or receiving bad news about others. And why is that? I think the main reason is I get nervous every time I flip the page here because Dalton had a hold of my notes this morning, and I don't know if they're in the right order. So if something doesn't make sense, just look at me weird, and I'll slow down and find the right page to move to. But the main reason is it seems to be human nature that we want to hear the dirty laundry. It's also human nature to want others to listen to what we have to say. Don't you hate when you speak and no one seems to listen or care what you have to say? I know I sure do. You think of it when you're a kid, and if we say that we say that me and Dad were out and we ran into one of his buddies and they got to talking about fishing or something or hunting or whatever the case may be, and I felt like I had this really cool story, and maybe the buddy would be like, okay, just kind of brush you off. And I think we can experience that throughout our whole life. That was just the first example that came to mind, not while I was writing this, but while I was standing here right now. So, but that's an example that I can think of, and we've all felt that feeling that you speak. Maybe it's in school, maybe you're at the lunch table, and you go to say something, and everyone else just kind of, but then when the other kid talks, it's, everyone wants to listen. So I know I don't like that feeling, and I can't think that anyone does either. But unfortunately, if you're spilling the tea on someone, you're bound to have a captive audience because no one wants to miss that information that you're about to share. Start gossiping, and everyone all of a sudden wants to listen to what you have to say. And I can be guilty of saying phrases that I've heard before without really considering the context. I know what they mean, I just don't always consider the application. It kind of struck me as I used the phrases here in the past couple of minutes, dirty laundry and spilling the tea, what application those phrases really are. And by the way, spilling the tea is a new one for me. There was a guy at work that shared that, a couple years ago, and he's retired now. And I don't know if I just never heard it, if it was an old saying or if it's a new saying. But while I was writing this, it kind of struck me what kind of a application it had. So I think all of us probably tried to clean up this morning. We showered, we brushed our hair, we put on clean clothes. We tried to make ourselves look as presentable as we could, and we wouldn't want anyone to see us in dirty or stained up clothing. Just a couple weeks ago, Dylan spilled some water on my shorts when we were at Texas Roadhouse for supper, and It didn't bother me a whole lot because I'd say most reasonable people, when I was carrying him out in his carrier, would assume what had happened. But it was a little awkward walking by the tables on the way out, wondering if people were looking at my shorts and thinking that I hadn't made it to the restroom in time. Um, but you know, um, I just found it interesting as I was kind of preparing that dirty laundry or spilling the tea had such a literal meaning that we wouldn't want to be seen out in dirty laundry, or if you spill the tea on someone's shirt, that they would be embarrassed about um, what you had to say. So, in Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 29, he told his readers, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." And to me, gossip is that corrupting talk. It's certainly not good for building up, but rather tearing down. If we're going to build someone up, we're just telling the truth. We're trying to, we're trying to build them up. But if we're gossiping, we're, more than likely we're trying to tear them down. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we're all guilty of it. But my hope is that we all realize the pain it can cause and strive to do better, not be a discourager. Which brings me to my final example of a discourager. That kind of goes along with gossiping, but it's simply just putting others down. Once again, we all know people who seemingly all they want to do is put others down. It tends to make people feel better about themselves. I found that it seems that people think it's easier to chop everyone else down to their level than it is to put in the work to try to raise themselves up. Unfortunately, it doesn't raise anyone up because, you're not being raised up by it. You're just simply bringing everyone as a whole down. Um, and I think Ephesians 4:29 that we just read fits this topic well also. Once again, putting others down goes completely against what Paul told those among the church at Ephesus when he said only things such as is good for building up should be coming out of their mouths. It's the polar opposite. Tearing someone down is completely opposite of building someone up. I know John Forshee mentioned this a couple weeks ago, and I feel the same way. And I really hope and feel that everyone who comes up here and teaches or preaches publicly feels this way. If I say something that's biblically incorrect this morning, by all means, pull me to the side afterwards and correct me, because that's gonna help me. It's gonna help me not to say that to someone else. It's gonna help me throughout my life, and that's how we all learn and become better. And I would view that as being an encourager. But I think I can also speak for everyone, along with myself, that I really don't need to know how many times I mispronounced a word, misspelled something on the PowerPoint that I'm not using. But people that do, I don't think it really improves anything to go up to Bill and say, "Hey man, did you mean blue as in the color, because you spelled it as in blowing out a candle?" That doesn't help anyone. That just tears people down and makes them second guess themselves, and just really isn't an encouragement, but rather the exact opposite. So I have people I work with. I'm sure we all know those people that you can't let your guard down. You got to be careful. You got to really make sure that every word you say is exactly the right way and taken the right way, because if it doesn't come out exactly the way you intend, they'll take hold of it and use it against you, and kind of makes for an unhealthy relationship in my eyes. So that's my 3 examples of discouragement. So now we can move on to our topic. We've discussed what it means to be a discourager. Let's focus our attention on what it means to be an encourager. My first example of being an encourager can be found in Hebrews 10, verses 24 and 25. We'll turn there. Hebrews 10:24 and 25. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So we read here how we're supposed to stir one another up to love and good works. Also turn back a couple pages to Hebrews 3, verse 13. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 13 says, "But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." So we read here that we're supposed to exhort one another. Okay, stir up one another and exhort one another. And I've never claimed to be an English expert, so you can make fun of me if you want. But of course, I'd be able to point out afterwards that you were being a discourager, so I assume you're not going to do that, okay? But I've been a lot better at numbers than I ever have been at the English language, okay? So make fun of me. I didn't know what exhort meant, so I had to look it up, okay? I've heard the word, I've heard it in context, but I didn't know what it meant, okay? So the definition that I received was right in line with what I felt the Hebrew writer was saying when he said to stir one another up. Exhort means to strongly encourage, earnestly urge, or to try to persuade someone to do something. And I can't help but think of some examples of exhortation that I'm sure we've all witnessed in our lives. And I can look around this morning and I know that there's, well, I said this before I looked around. Yes. I know that there's a few people. I gotta be careful about writing my notes beforehand. I know there is a few people in here that's gonna understand my exact example of exhortation. But I think we can all, even if you don't have firsthand experience of this one in particular, that we can all think of similar examples. So the example that comes to mind for me is when I recall some of the coaching moments that I witnessed from former Marietta College men's basketball coach John Vanderwall. We used to go to nearly every game, definitely nearly every Saturday game that didn't fall on one of our deer seasons, and we still try to, but unfortunately they seem to schedule all their home games for deer season or when we have something else planned. But we still try to go to a few, and they since have a different coach. But John come in fact, I think he was the youngest coach in NCAA basketball at the time, albeit Division III. He was the youngest coach whenever he came to Marietta. Like most successful coaches, and he had a long career, I guess is also meant to say. He was here for 15 or more years probably. Turned the program from the point where, I mean, honestly, there was probably, whenever we would go when I was a child, there was probably 70 people in the whole place, to the point where they actually had to have the fire marshal come in and count how many people was physically allowed to be in the building and stand there over them when they sold tickets to certain games and cut off ticket sales, because in a few short years they got good enough that they was selling the place out. So like most successful coaches, John was a competitor. It's hard to be successful if you don't really care about winning. You know, if you, once again, guy I work with, high school level, he went to a very small rural high school. I'm not wired this way. His coach, and I'm not disagreeing with what he did, maybe he was just a realist, I don't know. But his coach, apparently, they would be on their way to a game, and he says, we knew we were going to get thumped. I mean, he says we were going to play a team that was, 100 times better than us, and he says we never won a game that year. So maybe the coach was just a realist, I don't know. But on the way to the game, the coach would say, guys, I don't care if you win, if you lose, we all know we're probably going to lose, but we're going to eat good afterwards. And it's like, wow, I mean, thanks, coach. Thanks for having my back, and feeling good. That really gives me a spark whenever I go out there, and knowing that you already know I'm going to lose. But if you don't care about winning, it's hard to be successful. But John did. He cared about winning. And the thing that was easy to pick up on him was how much he cared about his players. To someone who only went to a game or two, John, depending on what game they went to, John could have seemed like a hot-headed coach who expected perfection out of his players. But that was far from the case. He didn't expect his players to be perfect. He didn't expect them to not make mistakes, but rather pushed them to give every ounce of effort that they had when they were on the court. I can remember countless times of sitting there and watching them, watching the opposing team go on a 13-0 run or something, and early in the first half, and it would be, say, 19-3. I mean, just terrible. And he would call a timeout. Okay, and for those of you, Harry is among this group, and of course, Mom and Dad and Amy know where we sit, but you guys might not. We always have sat diagonal to the Marietta bench on the other side of the gym with our back against the wall. As high as you can get in the bleachers really makes it nice to lean on something and be able to stand up and not be blocking anyone. But if you start going, don't take our seats because, we kind of like them. But what I'm saying is there isn't a place in the gym farther away from the Marietta bench. And anyone who's been to a basketball game knows what typically happens. He would call a timeout, and the players would sit down on that bench, and he was facing the other direction, okay? He's facing them. We're back here, a long ways away. They turn up the music incredibly loud in that place, even for my middle-aged ears, and at the time when they were younger ears, it was always too loud in my opinion, but apparently there's people among the college age that like the music turned up really loud. Whoever's running it, either they can't hear nothing or they like it turned up loud because they think that it really sets the mood. But anyways, it's loud in there. You have to scream at each other to talk. And the music's cranked up, and the cheerleaders are doing their cheer and chanting or whatever they do. And there's John facing the other way with his five players sitting on the bench. And you can hear him like you're in the huddle. And we're, like I say, we're as far away as we can get facing the other direction. And you can hear John yelling at them kids. But I'll tell you one thing. When they broke that huddle, more often than not, they look like a new team whenever they come back out. That's an example of stirring up his team. That's an example of exhorting his team. He had encouraged them. And I can think of other times that John would yank one of his star athletes out of the game for making a couple mistakes. And once again, maybe you don't have exact correlation with the Marietta College men's basketball team, but you may have watched one on TV, and you may have watched some of the historic coaches that have been known for getting the most out of their players. But he'd yank a star player out of the game. They'd make a couple seemingly minor mistakes, and he'd pull them out. And if they happened to make it past him to get to the bench, which every player, by the way, likes to do, they like to try to shrink down and get past the coach so that they don't have to hear what he has to tell them. But if they would make it past him, he would go over during the game and let his assistants take over because he felt it was this important, and have a conversation with that player. And normally you couldn't hear that. Normally that was more of a one-on-one, and it wasn't quite as loud, and he wasn't near as mad, per se, or near as animated. But he'd have a conversation with that player. And you'd watch the player come in that replaced him. And the player that would come in and replace him wasn't near as good. Okay, they're still a good athlete, but they just hadn't had as much time on the court. And you'd see them make mistake after mistake after mistake, way bigger mistakes than the star player had made. And they'd look over at that bench, and because they knew that hey, coach isn't very happy. They look over at that bench expecting to get yelled at, expecting to get the same thing, that the star player had got. And what he'd give them is, you're okay. You could read his lips. He held different players to a different standard, and he knew what they was capable of. He didn't expect perfection. He wanted the best out of everything that they had to offer. He knew that stirring a player up is what they needed to perform to their true potential. I don't think anyone who's coached youngsters, and I don't have any experience in that, but I've heard plenty of people that do. Every kid has a different personality, and you know how much you need and can push them, or you know that maybe all you need to do is look at them a certain way, or maybe what they do need is encouragement. But however it is, every player has a way to stir them up, and a good coach knows how to do that. But I will tell you one thing, and I got ahead in my notes, so I had to read a little bit. So sorry for the pause, but I will tell you one thing, that the players that John would chew on the hardest, his star players, they were the first players to get a hug after the game. And you'd think during the game that he's really mad at him, but after the game, that was the first person he was going up to and hugging whenever they won. We need that same type of stirring up in the church. And as Michael taught last week, it's easy to sit back and let others do the work. But if we're capable of doing it, we need to do our best to pitch in and help with the work. I think the majority of us who have taught and will teach these adult Bible classes this quarter, if we're being honest, would say that we would not be up here doing this if we weren't pushed outside of our comfort zone. At least I hope I'm not the only one that feels that way. Once again, we got people that they can get up here and effortlessly do this. I'm not one of those people. No matter how many times I'm up here, I really don't enjoy it. It makes me nervous, but it's outside of my comfort zone. I think it is for a lot of us. But several years ago, Roger approached me about teaching one of these classes, and I didn't really hesitate to say yes. Always tried to, if I think I can do something, I've tried to not say no about it, but I know I wouldn't have volunteered on my own without him asking. I wouldn't have volunteered on my own, at least not at that point in my life. I'm still not comfortable getting up here, but I agree that I'm capable of doing it. I'd admit that I learn way more by standing up here than I do sitting back there. So anyone that's considered it at all, you learn way more preparing to teach a class than you do sitting there, even if you listen to every word. So, and I would guess that we would have very few elders and deacons if there weren't for someone encouraging them, whether it be their spouse, whether it be another member. As a matter of fact, I think we'd have fewer brothers and sisters here if it weren't for the encouragement from someone who cared about them at some point in their life. Our second example of being an encourager, and I'm running late on time, so we're going to skip some of our verses here, but our second example of being an encourager is encouraging an erring brother or sister. 2 Timothy 4, verse 2 insists on us preaching the word and to reprove, rebuke, and exhort. I knew better than to try to say that because I struggle. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort. We first have to know the truth, then with patience need to stand for the truth and disapprove of sin. And finally, encourage the erring one to either begin their Christian walk or get back on the path they were once on. Galatians 6:1 tells us that when we see a brother or sister caught in transgression, we who are spiritual should restore them in a spirit of gentleness, while making sure not to allow ourselves to fall into temptation. Once again, the idea of living in the world but without being of the world. James 5:19 through 20 tells us that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. All good reasons to try to encourage an erring brother or sister. And our final example of being an encourager is uplifting one another. When I read 1 Thessalonians 5:11 that we should build one another up, I can't help but think of certain members in our assembly. And I won't share any names because I'm sure they wouldn't want that. But I can think of people who send cards, who send texts, who make visits, who provided food to us whenever we had our kids, or who simply have a smile on their face every time I see them. These people are uplifting to me, and I'm sure you also feel that way about them. And I know that they're going to receive their reward someday. So I feel like we've touched on this quite a bit, but just to reiterate, I want to focus for the last couple of minutes on the importance of encouragement. What is the purpose of encouraging someone? I'm going to suggest that when someone encourages another person to do something, it's always because it's something they think the other person should do. I don't think that always means that they have the other person's best interests at heart. Someone may encourage another person to do something really stupid so that they'll make a fool of themselves. And I think we can think of times when we were on the playground or in class or whatever, at lunch, at school, that you had that one person, that one classmate that they'd do whatever you said, and hopefully we weren't the guilty party either in being that person or being the person encouraging them to do it, but that we could encourage them, hey, throw that yogurt across the room, and they would do it, and it's because of that peer pressure that they did it, but we're not encouraging them to do something good. So it can be good or bad. Hopefully more often than not, though, someone encourages another to do something because they think it'll make them better. That could be going to college. That could be choosing a particular career path. That could be dating someone in particular. It could be something as important as following Jesus. Think with me for a minute on the words peer pressure. It's something we're warned about throughout our childhood. Don't let so-and-so pressure you into doing this or that. But as many times as we're all warned of that, and it could be parents, it could be teachers, it could be, people, Bible school teachers, it could be whoever. We were all kids once, and we were all warned of peer pressure, okay? If we're being honest, I'd say the majority of us can think of at least one occasion or another where we submitted to that peer pressure. And hopefully it was something minor. Maybe it was, I dare you to drink this hot sauce or whatever. I'm not guilty of that, but I have seen people do that, or eat this really hot pepper, and that peer pressure is something that we know we probably shouldn't do. We give into. No matter how many times we were warned about it, we give into it. So that peer pressure doesn't always have to be negative, though. And if we can give in to that peer pressure when it is something negative, I think we can also give into it when it's something positive. It can actually have a positive outcome, and we should be, extending that peer pressure. We should be pressuring our peers here to be better Christians. So as we draw this lesson to a close, I'd like to follow along with the theme of our study this morning. I'd like to encourage each and every one of you to look for ways to encourage others this week. And once again, we're going to have that perfect opportunity in a little over an hour to encourage a young man who's going to be preaching for his first time. Let's take advantage of that opportunity and look for additional opportunities this week to stir one another up, to encourage an erring brother or sister, and uplift everyone we come in contact with. That's my lesson. May or may not have been on purpose that I didn't give time for questions. I'll let you be the judge. Thank you.